The Silent Takeover. 5 industries Australia now dominates globally that no one talks about. While everyone's watching China and the U.S. fight for global dominance, Australia has quietly become the world leader in 5 industries worth over $400 billion. And most people have no idea. If you think Australia only exports kangaroos and Vegemite, what you're about to discover will completely change how you see this country. Because right now, as you watch this video, Australia is controlling supply chains that determine whether your phone charges, whether hospitals can operate, and whether the world eats. Let's start with number 5. Your next electric car battery? There's a 50% chance it contains Australian lithium, but China almost stole this entire industry. Meet James Chun, 34 years old, mining engineer in Perth. In 2019, James watched something that kept him up at night. Chinese companies were buying Australian lithium mines at record pace. Massive deals, hundreds of millions of dollars. And each time, Australia lost a little more control over the one resource powering the entire green energy revolution. I remember the day the AVZ Minerals deal was announced. James told us, $300 million. Chinese state-owned company. Full control. I thought, we're 18 months away from losing this forever. Then something unexpected happened. The Australian government blocked it. $300 million deal, dead. National security concerns. And suddenly, the entire game changed. Today, Australia controls 47% of global lithium production. That according to the U.S. Geological Survey, 2024. More than Chile, more than China, more than everyone else combined. There's one mine in Western Australia called Greenbushes. One single mine. It produces more lithium than entire countries. When Tesla builds a battery, when Volkswagen launches an electric vehicle, when Chinese manufacturers assemble power banks, Australian lithium. We went from nearly irrelevant to indispensable in 5 years. James said, now, we're powering the world's green transition. But there's a problem that could collapse this entire industry by 2027. And it's not what you think. Water. Lithium extraction uses 500,000 gallons of water per ton. And guess what? Western Australia, where most lithium is mined, is one of the driest regions on Earth. Climate projections show water availability dropping by 20% by 2030. The entire industry could drown, ironically, from lack of water. Unless Australian companies are developing something called direct lithium extraction. It's a new technology that uses 90% less water. Vulcan Energy is running trials in 2024, and early results are promising. If it works, Australia doesn't just keep its dominance. It becomes the only country capable of sustainable lithium production. But lithium is just the beginning. The next industry on our list makes lithium look tiny. A device invented in a Melbourne garage has saved over 500,000 lives worldwide, and Big Pharma tried to bury it. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, 41 years old, biomedical engineer in Sydney. In 2015, Sarah developed something extraordinary, an AI system that could detect early-stage cancer using just a blood sample. 7 different cancer types, detected 18 months earlier than traditional methods. Accuracy rate, 91%. She approached major pharmaceutical companies for partnerships. Every single one refused. They told me the same thing, Sarah revealed. Detection doesn't make money. Treatment does. One executive literally said, why would we help people catch cancer early when we profit from late-stage treatment? That's when Sarah made a decision that changed everything. She partnered with public hospitals instead. Bypassed Big Pharma entirely. And within 3 years, her AI was saving lives across Australia. And the world took notice. Here's something that'll shock you. Australia ranks 3rd globally in medical patents per capita. 3rd. That's according to the World Intellectual Property Organization, 2023. Ahead of the United States. Ahead of Germany. Want to know why? Because Australian researchers can't compete with Big Pharma's budgets. So they innovate differently. They solve problems that big companies ignore because they're not profitable enough. Think about that. A technology invented in Sydney is giving people in rural India in African villages, in South American cities the ability to hear for the first time. But here's the economic bomb. Australia's medical tech export value jumped 340% from 2019 to 2024. It's now worth $18.7 billion annually, according to the Australian Trade Commission. And there's a hidden giant most people have never heard of, ResMed, Australian company. They control 40% of the global sleep apnea device market. If you've ever used a CPAP machine or know someone who has, there's a massive chance it was made by ResMed, the cochlear implant, Australian invention. It's restored hearing to over 650,000 people worldwide. 95% success rate. Cochlear Ltd reported in 2024 that their devices are now in 140 countries. Imagine falling asleep, not knowing if you'll wake up. That's sleep apnea. Your breathing stops. Your oxygen drops. Your heart strains. Every single night, millions of people experience this terror. Now imagine a device the size of your phone, solving it. Completely. That's Australian innovation. We went from treating this as a niche problem to understanding it affects 936 million adults globally, Sarah explained. And Australian companies are leading the solution. Medical devices save lives. But our next industry? It literally feeds 400 million people every single year. Australia feeds 60 million people domestically, but exports food for 400 million. Here's the technology making it possible. Tom Harrison, 52 years old, fourth-generation wheat farmer in Queensland. In 2017, Tom's farm was dying. Not metaphorically, literally dying. 6 years of drought. Crop yields down 60%. $2 million in debt. The bank was months away from foreclosure. I watched my grandfather build this farm, Tom said, voice breaking. My father expanded it. I was about to be the generation that lost it all. Then Tom made a desperate gamble. He invested his last $80,000 in precision agriculture AI. It was technology that analyzed soil moisture, crop health, pest patterns, all via satellite in real time. Every square meter of his farm monitored 24/7. 18 months later, Tom's farm generated $600,000 in profit. The technology saved my family's 120-year legacy, he told us. And Tom's not alone. Australian agricultural tech has increased crop yields by 37% while using 28% less water. That's from a CSIRO study in 2023. Think about those numbers. More food, less water. In a world facing both food shortages and climate change. Here's the insane part. Australia has only 6% of the world's farmland. Just 6%. But it produces 9% of the world's wheat, 18% of its wool, and 14% of its beef. The math doesn't make sense until you understand the technology. Picture vast golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon. Beautiful, right? But underground, sensors are mapping every drop of moisture, every nutrient deficiency in real time. Drones overhead are scanning for disease before it's visible to the human eye. AI is predicting optimal harvest times down to the hour. This isn't farming. This is precision food manufacturing, and it's desperately needed. The UN estimates 345 million people are facing acute food insecurity in 2024. That means 345 million people don't know where their next meal is coming from. Australian agri-tech companies are now operating in 47 countries, teaching these methods, adapting the technology for local conditions. There's a livestock tracking AI system developed in Australia that reduces disease spread by 64%. It's now being used across Africa and Asia. When a single cow shows symptoms, the AI traces every animal it contacted, predicts spread patterns, and recommends targeted interventions. One Australian innovation is preventing livestock disease outbreaks that used to kill thousands of animals and devastate farming communities. But there's a dark cloud on the horizon. Climate models predict a 15% reduction in Australian agricultural capacity by 2030 without major adaptation. Longer droughts, more extreme weather, soil degradation. The very technology that made Australia a food superpower might not be enough unless the alternatives work. Melbourne has vertical farming startups producing crops using 95% less water than traditional methods. InvertiGrow, one of the leading companies, is growing strawberries, lettuce, and herbs in climate-controlled indoor facilities. They're harvesting crops every 6 weeks instead of every 6 months. We're not replacing traditional farming. Their CEO explained, we're insurance. When climate change makes outdoor farming impossible in some regions, we'll keep the food supply stable. Food keeps people alive. But the next industry? It's building the infrastructure holding civilization together. If you crossed a bridge, entered a tunnel, or walked through an airport in the past decade, there's a 30% chance Australian software designed it. Emma Rodriguez, 29 years old, software architect in Melbourne. In 2018, Emma was consulting for a major construction firm working on a billion-dollar tunnel project. She noticed something terrifying. The engineers were using design software from the 1990s. They were modeling a structure that needed to last 100 years, withstand earthquakes, handle climate change, using technology older than Google. Emma said, it was insane. Traditional design software couldn't model climate resilience, couldn't simulate earthquake stress in real time, couldn't predict material degradation over decades. So Emma's team built something new, AI-powered infrastructure modeling software that could do all of that and more. It could test a bridge design against 10,000 different earthquake scenarios in minutes. It could predict how materials would age under different climate conditions. It could optimize construction sequences to save millions of dollars. Within 3 years, 6 of the world's 10 largest construction firms were using it. Today, Australian construction tech companies hold 31% of the global market share in infrastructure design software. That's according to Gartner Research, 2024. The Sydney Harbour Bridge? Australian designed, obviously, but also the Burj Khalifa structural analysis, Australian software. London's Crossrail tunnels, Australian modeling. Singapore's Marina Bay expansion, Australian engineering calculations. In 2022, Emma's software prevented a catastrophic failure in Tokyo's subway expansion. The AI detected a stress pattern in the tunnel design that traditional methods missed. Emma revealed, if they'd built it as originally planned, the tunnel could have collapsed within 5 years. 700,000 daily commuters would have been at risk. One piece of Australian software. Hundreds of thousands of lives saved. But there's a hidden giant that's even bigger. Atlassian. Ever heard of it? If you work in tech, you definitely have. If you don't, you've probably never seen the name. But Atlassian, an Australian company, powers project management for 260,000 plus companies worldwide. NASA uses it. Tesla uses it. SpaceX uses it. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all using Australian software to coordinate their teams. Every time you click Create Project in Jira or Trello, you're using Australian technology. Every single time. Atlassian is valued at $45 billion. It was founded by 2 university students in Sydney with a $10,000 credit card loan. Australian infrastructure tech exports grew 412% from 2019 to 2024. Now we're $23.1 billion annually. But there's a vulnerability. Cybersecurity. 40% of infrastructure software faces daily hacking attempts from hostile state actors. Think about what that means. If someone hacks the software that designs bridges, airports, water systems, they could sabotage critical infrastructure without ever setting foot in a country. That's not theoretical. It's happening right now. Australian cybersecurity firms are responding by developing quantum-resistant encryption. Quintessence Labs is leading globally in this space. Their technology is designed to protect infrastructure software from even quantum computers, machines so powerful they can break current encryption in seconds. We're in an arms race, Emma explained. Every time we build something that holds civilization together, someone tries to tear it down. We just have to stay ahead. Digital infrastructure runs the modern world. But there's one industry Australia dominates that's even more critical and controversial. Every smartphone, every missile system, Every wind turbine requires 17 specific minerals, and Australia controls the supply chain for 14 of them. David Wong, 46 years old, mineral processing specialist in the Northern Territory. In 2020, David watched a geopolitical nightmare unfold in real time. China threatened to cut rare earth exports to Western nations. Here's why that mattered. 95% of rare earth processing happened in China, not mining, processing. The complex, expensive, environmentally challenging work of turning raw or into usable materials. Western militaries? Completely dependent on Chinese rare earths for missile guidance systems. Tech companies? Every smartphone, every computer, Chinese minerals. Renewable energy? Wind turbines, solar panels, Chinese supply chains. I remember the Pentagon report. David said, it estimated the U.S. military would run out of critical components within 18 months if China blocked exports. 18 months until the world's most powerful military couldn't build weapons. David worked for Linus Corporation, one of the only non-Chinese rare earth processors in the world. When China made its threat, everything changed overnight. We had 6 employees in 2020, David explained. By 2024, we had 340. We went from barely relevant to absolutely indispensable. Australia holds 30% of the world's rare earth reserves and is now the number 2 processor globally, behind only China. That's according to the Australian Bureau of Resources 2024. Let me show you what that means in practice. F-35 fighter jets, Australian minerals and electronics. iPhone batteries, Australian lithium and cobalt. MRI machines, Australian rare earths and the magnets. Wind turbines, Australian neodymium. Missile guidance systems, Australian praseodymium. Satellite components, Australian yttrium. Every piece of modern technology, every weapon system, every medical device. Australian minerals somewhere in the supply chain. In 2023, the U.S. Department of Defense signed a $1.2 billion deal with Australian rare earth companies. Not a trade agreement, a strategic partnership. The official statement used 3 words that should terrify China. Counter Chinese dominance. Picture a dusty red desert in Western Australia. Endless horizon. Blazing sun. Looks like nothing, right? Wrong. Underground lies the future of computing, warfare, and renewable energy. Critical minerals exports from Australia increased 890% from 2019 to 2024. They're now worth $67 billion annually. But China didn't just accept defeat. They responded by blocking Australian rare earth imports, attempting to restart their monopoly. They assumed Australia couldn't process minerals without Chinese technology. They were wrong. Australian companies had already built the processing capacity. They'd partnered with U.S., Japanese, and European firms. They'd secured alternative markets. China blinked first. In 2024, Chinese companies started quietly buying Australian processed rare earths again. David revealed. They realized they needed us more than we needed them. But there's an environmental problem. Traditional rare earth processing creates toxic waste, radioactive sludge, contaminated water. For every ton of rare earths extracted, you generate 200 tons of waste. Australian companies claim they've developed methods that are 70% cleaner than Chinese processing. Whether that's true or just greenwashing, time will tell. There's also a fascinating alternative emerging: urban mining. Instead of digging new mines, some Australian companies are extracting minerals from e-waste. Old phones, old computers, old electronics. They're recovering rare earths at 98% purity, and it's far less environmentally damaging than traditional mining. Neometals achieved a breakthrough in 2024, extracting rare earths from lithium-ion batteries at commercial scale. If this technology spreads, it could revolutionize the entire industry. 5 industries, $550 billion in annual exports. But here's what connects them all: strategy. In 2020, the Australian government launched something called the 2030 Economic Sovereignty Plan. The goal? Reduce dependence on any single nation, especially China. They invested $78 billion in strategic industries: lithium, rare earths, medical tech, agricultural innovation, infrastructure software. It's the largest peacetime economic intervention in Australian history, and it's working. As U.S.-China tensions escalate, Australia has positioned itself as a trusted middle power. Democratic nations need critical resources, but they don't want to depend on authoritarian regimes. Australia fills that gap, but this strategy has made Australia a target. Cyber attacks on Australian infrastructure increased 620% from 2020 to 2024, according to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. That's not random hackers. That's sophisticated, state-sponsored attacks targeting the exact industries we've discussed. Every industry we've covered faces the same threat: economic coercion, supply chain disruption, or worse. But the success stories show something important. Small nations can dominate global industries through innovation, not just size. Australia has 26 million people. China has 1.4 billion. The U.S. has 340 million. Yet Australia is outcompeting both in specific, strategic sectors. That's not luck. That's deliberate, focused innovation. So here's the question no one's asking. Is Australia's global dominance in these industries a brilliant strategy that secures the future? Or does it paint a target on the country's back? If you're Australian, do you feel safer or more vulnerable knowing your country controls resources the superpowers desperately want? If you're not Australian, would you trust your country's military, technology, and infrastructure to depend on another nation's resources? Some say Australia is the new Switzerland, neutral supplier to the world. Others say it's becoming the next battleground in the new Cold War. Drop your answer below. Is Australia playing the game perfectly, or has it already lost control?